today. Or download it or have it on your computer or whatever. How are you doing, sir? No?
Yes.
It was right there. I stole
whatever.
it.
Okay, so how many do we have?
2, 4, 6, 8, 9.
Okay. What's the certificate? Okay, good. Perfect. Thank you, Susan. We appreciate it. I have a swig of my nutrition. So good. Okay, Zoomers, can you hear me okay? Let me see a hands up or a wave or something. We got it? We good? Okay. I'm going to ask through something because we don't have this up here.
Legal one, legal two. Yeah. Horrible. Our daughter lives there anyway. But
I saw something today that they were doing it here. Let me see. Oh, I think it was you.
I can use that in my life. That's really interesting. I think that
well, it has to be on office piece. It's not printed. And we just have all on.
Yeah, that's the last thing. I got to see it before lunch.
I'm glad to see technology doesn't cooperate with somebody else. Certainly done with me. The Zoomers, I think you can hear me while they're working on getting you guys up on the other screens. There's paperwork in the back, James Dean. Here. I'm working on not losing my voice, which is why I keep it lubricated with my Coca-Cola. It's just for you, so you guys can hear. Because the concept of the class, so everybody has a material. Jesse, you have your material? You have the materials?
Yeah.
Back, on the back?
Boy, don't let anybody in here.
You know, the security was on break or when they got in.
You know, they'll let anybody in. I said we got to give them a raise. We need to pay them more. Get high quality people in there.
I had to bribe a little bit.
Not here.
That's okay. I mean, they're there or whatever.
I just want to say, no, you need to. No, I'm from. I didn't show you. I like it.
Two.
Color and style.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just wanted to make sure because I have.
Maybe we can just start it on the.
Relative no. And so I was like, you did say the same thing. This is a trial.
He's the only one of the 13 that actually shows on the screen.
Yeah, exactly. I don't
That's
know where he
strange.
went.
That's kind of crazy. So while they're working on our Zoomers, we got our livers here. The concept of what we're talking about today are advanced conversations. And you've got 20 situations, true, false, multiple choice. And the concept is it'll get us into conversations about different issues, about different topics. And a couple of these, few of these are just pure concepts, but most of them actually evolved from transactions we had in which the conversation we had or didn't have potentially created a real challenge. There are consequences based on our.
I've done, but this is.
Yeah, okay. Based on what we say or do or don't say or do or whatever. So it's very important for us to have this sense of this. This is my last class this year. So hopefully we'll learn some good stuff to carry us over through the holidays and January. Oh, look at that. Okay, sweet. We got it. We're good.
Oh, it took too long.
Goodness.
Can we turn? Is there any way to turn that?
Oh, no, I was tall enough.
I'm ready. Ah, look at you. There you go. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
That's great. Thank
Okay.
you. Yep. Okay,
Everything
good. You're looking good.
Okay.
So Zoomers, can you hear me okay? Give me a big thumbs up. Okay, good. Thanks, James.
Yes, I can.
So we're talking about, and hopefully you all have the handout.
Yes.
There's Angie.
Hello.
Sorry, I was in with Janet.
It's okay. And when we talk about conversations, remember, conversations are two-way. Conversation, not just you talking or preaching or teaching or whatever, but the concept of a conversation is that you have a conversation so you can learn something. And hopefully, probably in most cases, learn something new about them, and they can learn something, important information from you. So as we go through these particular questions, and some of them I have a note in there that talks about what they are, what we're going to do is I'll read the question, and then you give me your thoughts on the answer, true and false, or if it's multiple choice, which choice, and then we'll discuss it and see what everybody has, what the Zoomers have and what the roomers in here have. Okay, everybody good so far, what we're going to do? Okay. Question number one, the conversations we are concerned with are primarily those conversations in which we advise our clients on important and relevant issues that require decisions on the part of the clients. Now, I've got a note here that may help you on your true or false. If the answer is true, provide examples of issues we may advise our client, which would require decisions on their part. So is everybody comfortable with what the question is asking? Everybody good? Okay, so just give the Zoom a chance first. So Zoomers, what do you think question one? Is that true or is it false?
True.
Unmute yourself, Zoomers, and say what you think.
True. True. It's true.
Okay,
True.
Zoomers, if you don't say anything, you've defaulted to the live folks. James, it looks like you're talking, but you must be muted because I can't hear you.
I just said true. Can you hear me, Bob?
I still can't hear you, James.
Oh.
I can see your mouth moving, but there's no sound there. James, can you hear me? Or unmute you, see if we can unmute you there.
I can hear you, Bob. How about now?
You got it at 0, Bob.
Can you hear me now, Bob? Hello, Bob.
Bump it up some. Okay, James, keep
How
going.
about now, Bob?
I can hear you now. Where do you go?
Good. Everybody here on Zoom said it's true.
Okay, so the Zoomer say it's true. Okay, so what does the live folks say? True or false? Okay, Hawkins is true. Now here's the trick, because it says if it's true, what are some examples of things that we would give our clients that we're given that information and it requires them to make a decision? Somebody give me some examples.
Timelines.
Pardon me?
Timelines
Timeline for what?
for all of the
Like the option period.
option period.
Okay, so things in the contract or an addendum that have some timeline attached to them, you would provide them information so they can make a decision on how much time. Like, let's say, for example, buyer approval and third-party financing addendum. You know, you got a blank there to fill out. And so to have some sense of what we would do there, how much time you would put in that blank, who would you talk to and who would you want them to talk to come up with a number of days? Their lender. And so you would advise them as the lender says, yeah, based on this borrower, you know, we can have buyer approval done in 15 days and not loan approval, but buyer approval. You then have a conversation with your buyer and say, okay, the concept of buyer approval, the shorter the time frame, as long as it's reasonable and doable, the shorter the time frame, the better the seller likes it. The longer the time frame, the more time the buyer has to make a decision about financial approval, about buyer approval. And so you help the buyer understand as you advise them, here are the pros and the cons, pluses and minuses for making a decision. In a buyer approval, a decision always starts with, as Sarah pointed out, the buyer's lender. Because you've got to have information. We don't ever make that up. We never say, well, for this deal, it's a multiple offer situation. We got to put in this number of days. Well, not if that's not okay with buyer's lender. Buyer's lender said, well, you know, I got a guy with bonuses and overtime and all kinds of other things, and it's going to take us 30 days to get this thing through it all. It'd be silly to put in 15 days because, you know, it's not a doable situation as you work through it. Somebody else besides timelines, give me something else that we might give information to our client for them to make a decision about something. Zoomers, you have something else that we might want to come up with?
Multiple offers.
Okay, so we let our buyer know you're in a multiple offer situation. What does this mean to the buyer as they're making a decision on how much to offer, price-wise, and the terms of an offer? How's this going to affect the buyer?
I was thinking right before they even get any to let them know what constitutes an offer, let them know things to look for in the contract. What are some things they want out of the sale?
Yeah. So now you're looking at it from a seller's perspective, right, James?
Right.
Okay. So a seller needs to think through helping you as the listing agent to find what an offer actually is and how we work through that process and make those decisions. So we're going to advise the seller on the process in dealing with what kind of information do they give to potential buyers, how much information they put out there, some things you're going to do to help buyers make a good, clean offer. Your seller, for example, if they really need a seller leaseback, then that's information you're going to give to buyer agents, buyer prospects. Say, our seller needs a leaseback for a week, 2 weeks, you know, and here's why. Working through that. I had an interesting scenario recently in a multiple offer situation that, and I don't see, it's not one of the agents on the Zoom here. The listing agent, our agent had the buyer and there was a multiple offer and asked the listing agent about things on deal with a multiple offer. And asked the listing agent, are you going to do a highest and best and that kind of thing? The listing agent said, yeah. And here's how we do this. When we get all these other offers, we're going to tell everyone the highest price. We're going to tell them, here's the highest price so far. Everybody knows the top price. Now, I know the broker for that company really well. So I called him up. I said, this is a little unusual. I understand the seller gets to do this. I mean, seller clearly gets to do that. And I said, but I've not seen it before. So give me your thoughts and your experience with it. He said, well, we've used it several times. In fact, the broker said, you know, some personal property that he and his wife had sold, they used it. And it worked out well. It created a situation where they gave a final number and everybody knew that that was the number it had to be. And so they got other offers for a little bit above that. I said, you know, in some way, do you think that limits the offer you're going to get from buyers? I mean, let's just say that the highest offer you've got right now is $600,000. Are the other buyers going to want to say, well, we will offer 601 or 605, or when otherwise, if they didn't know that number, they might have offered 620. He said, well, it's a possibility, but our experience has been that it really causes buyers to at least do that, and if not more, kind of gives them a target. And I said, okay, I'm going to have to think through this because it is unusual. And says, one of my concerns is it kind of reduces everything down to 1/3 of one paragraph, paragraph 3C, sales price. So all the other things in an offer were kind of discounted, dealing with closing date, lease back, title company, who the buyer's lender, all the other criteria the seller might use. Sellers kind of said, you know, the only thing that really counts here is the sales price. Not who pays the title policy, not who this, that, and the other. And he says, well, you know, we're presuming, and he said, I agree, it may be a big presumption, but I'm presuming that everybody understands that the rest of the offer has to be really good, clean offer. That the seller's going to say, I'm looking at comparable offers, and the only real distinction from one comparable offer to another is going to be the price. He says, you know, we're going to presume that everything else is going to be all the things the seller needs. I said, so in some way, your listing agent has communicated to buyer's agents, here are our preferences. Here's our preferred title company, and here are our closing dates. Here's our whatever. He said, yeah, we would do that anyway. Now we're just adding that one additional element saying, by the way, to make it a good, clean offer, here's what the seller needs, but they also need, and here's our best price so far. So it's kind of an unusual situation. And in a case like that, you know, obviously it has to be, the seller has to be on board with that, has to agree to do it. In a case like that, you know, we would advise our seller, if that's something they were going to do, here are the pluses and the minuses of this. You know, the buyer may say, well, most important thing to the seller is going to be the price, so I can get away with some other terms here that I wouldn't ordinarily do. I don't know. It's the first time I've experienced it. Has anyone here experienced it? Zoomers, have you guys experienced that situation? Anyone? I don't hear anybody saying they have. Okay. So.
I got a different
question. Okay. So, Marcia, are you there?
Taking a chance.
Are you there, Marcia?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Larry has a question. Is that okay?
I guess so.
I'm just checking with you because I know he's got a quota. He's got a max.
Yes, I did.
This is his first one, so we'll keep count here.
Okay.
Okay, Larry.
So if I was representing the buyer, I wouldn't like that. Because what's to prevent the seller from putting that out there, getting a whole new set of offers,
Yeah.
and saying, okay, we're going to do this again.
Yeah. So Larry says if he had the buyer, he wouldn't like it because he's thinking the seller's playing games here and putting this out here, and then he's going to use it and do it again. And say, well, okay, I got that now. In some ways, it's kind of an escalation clause in reverse, which is kind of an interesting situation because it's not a clause. The seller saying, yeah, here's the best. Well, after the seller then gets that, so what's to keep the seller from it? Okay, now the best is 620. So let's do another highest and best. See if we can beat that.
Or now let's have a competition.
Let's have a competition. Yeah. So it's an interesting scenario. Yes. Okay, Sarah.
How do we know they're telling us the truth?
That's exactly.
Okay. So how do you know the seller is telling the truth? You never do. You never do. One of the things that we talk about when we ask questions about things like, if you're the listing agent, you will always, never an exception, ask the buyer's agent, does your buyer have a house they need to sell? You'll always ask that. Now, they can't lie to you, but if they say, no, do you trust them? But later on, when it turns out they can't close because they did have a house to sell, they said, because remember, the buyer doesn't have to tell the seller to have a house to sell. They're not required to do that. They can't lie about it when asked, but so we just kind of have to trust it when we're asked the question and give the information. Whether or not you believe them or not, frankly, it's going to come down to who the agent is and your relationship. You know them if they're a good agent, if they're good people. Now, clearly, if the agent is in our office, you're going to be able to trust them. If you can't trust them, then they shouldn't be in our office. So that's easy that is. So yeah, any other quick things that we need to advise our clients on, buyer or seller, that they've got to make a decision? Any other kinds of information that pop your mind and say, well, here's some really important things that we advise our client on. I'm talking about timelines. They're in a multiple offer situation, which is going to affect the kind of terms. In a multiple offer, they're not going to ask the seller to pay the title policy, et cetera, and so forth. Anything else pop up says, hey, here's something else we tell our client. Advise them so they can make a decision.
Kind of like, I'm in multiple offers. You know, I periodically do net sheets.
Oh yeah, for a seller, you're going to do a net sheet. So you're going to advise your seller, you say, okay, here are 10 offers.
Yeah.
And here's the net on the 10 offers.
Exactly.
Here all, because the seller will have, with your advice, criteria on how they get to the offer that's has the highest chance of closing, which is the most important criteria and the hardest to determine. So as you work through that, so you won't just have, and by the way, on a listing, TREC requires you to create a net sheet for the seller. That's a TREC requirement. So you've got to do that. So when you do that, you're saying, seller, here's your net, but let's also look at these other factors. This is a really good net. This offer number 3 is a really good net. In fact, it may be the best net, but here's some of our concerns. Mm-hmm. The buyer's lender is one of the big 3, and we don't trust them.
Right.
Don't close on time. Sometimes they don't close at all kinds of challenges. You may have a challenge with the title company the buyer is asked to use. You may have a challenge with who the buyer's agent is. You may have just had a really bad experience with them, and you say, wow, this is an agent that, you know, doesn't communicate and doesn't do what they say they're going to do. And so there are all kinds of other things that are involved besides, but you'll create a net sheet. So you'll give the seller, your seller client, that information and the other information so your seller can make a good decision.
I think appraisals, you need to tell them about that and the difference between cash and financing. Mm-hmm. I mean, they don't know.
They don't know. They don't understand. You're exactly right. Sarah?
Inspections.
Inspections.
Yeah, you're going to educate your seller. We expect the buyer to do an inspection, and we expect this to happen. Here's the timeline of when we expect it to happen, and here's how we go through that. Here's what we do. You're going to, when you take the listing, you're going to already have a conversation with your seller about the condition of their property.
Which is never true. They don't take it.
Well, they generally don't.
They don't know how.
They don't know what kind of condition. Now, some people do. Some people, in fact, some people are not optimistic on the condition of their property. They really think it's worse than it really is. And then when inspection comes up and it's not as bad as they thought it was going to be, they say, wow, okay, that's great, you know. So, but everybody's got a different opinion about the condition of their property, especially if they've ever had any experience with roof, termites, foundations, electrical issues, things of that nature, or all the above. So you're absolutely right. You're going to go through that. A lot of this is we're educating, we're providing information, and letting them make decisions as you work through it. Now, there's a follow-up question to all of this, because we're talking about relevant issues. And so how do you determine a particular issue is relevant to that specific client? Because remember, if it's something that requires a decision, it's something that's relevant. It's something that they need to know this information to make a decision.
You got to ask really good questions.
You really have to ask good questions, and you got to listen to the answers to the questions. You really got to find out from these clients what's important to them. You know, there's some things that are just not important to clients at all. It's not relevant. And you're making decisions based on the feedback you're getting from your client about what really is important to them. This is a judgment call on your part. One of the things that it's kind of a double-edged sword here. Client is the decision maker. We all are clear on that. Client gets to make the decision. However, you make decisions by what you tell your client, because you're not going to tell them everything. Mm-hmm. They won't sit around and wait for it. They say, you know, just tell us what we need to know to decide if we want to accept that offer. Tell us what we need to know how much to offer on that property. You know, what do we need to know? And then based on a whole lot of things as you work through the process. So, you know, relevant requires us to really pay attention to our client, and it will be different with each and every client. Every client's going to have a different thing they place emphasis on. One buyer you may have, the guy may have been a builder for many, many years and have a lot of experience with property and is more knowledgeable about condition properties than the normal buyer. Grab right there. And is more comfortable with certain kinds of things that show up in inspection. You know, that buyer may say, you know, the key thing for me, and the phrase we hear is, just need to make sure it has good bones. That the house has good bones, that it's got a good structure, it's good foundation and roof, you know, that it's got good bones. I can deal with all the other. I just need to have good bones. I don't want to have to mess with trying to rebuild the house. So we're still on question 1. So we're good. Okay, so any other follow-up or anything on question 1 before we get to 2? Everybody good? Okay, so in 2, the conversations an experienced agent will have with their clients is different than the conversations a less experienced agent will have. Note the word is different, not better or worse. So what do you think? Is number 2 true or false? What do you think, Zoomers? What's your thought here?
I think it's true.
Okay,
true.
So the Zoomers think true. What do the live folks think?
True.
Okay, so notice if it's true, what might an experienced agent's conversation include or address that a less experienced might not include? So if you think it's true, and I believe it is, tell me why it's true.
The statement you hate, this is what you usually put down.
Oh, yeah. So one thing that happens sometimes with brand new agents is when they went to real estate school and they taught them, here's what we put in this blank. Some instructors say, oh, we always put this in that blank. You hear that. And sometimes an agent walks away from that thinking, oh, for that blank, oh, objections, we always put 5 days. 5 days is the standard practice. I think the law requires 5 days. So they do. So an inexperienced agent might do that. Now, having said that, an experienced agent gets into a habit and just transaction after transaction after transaction, they always use certain days, certain things, certain information. So it could be different. But what are the things that an experienced agent might bring to the transaction that might cause them to include some things in a conversation that an agent who's been in the business for less than a year might not know to include?
Bob, it's Laura. I would say that the key is the experience they've had. Just like you can testify that most of us couldn't because of the experience you've had. They've had a transaction where either they encountered that or they learned about it or they heard about it, and therefore it becomes part of their practice.
Yeah. Remember one of my little phrases, every transaction you do changes what you do in the next transaction. And it does. You learn something, wow, I never would have thought to look for that anymore, but now I am. So you're exactly right. Because of the experience level, there are things that you would think about. Just one of our questions in here deals with a house with a pool on a creek lot. And we're going to talk about how an agent might address that differently if they've had the experience as you work through the process. And there are clearly certain kinds of things that an experienced agent will just be aware of, would know. And you're right. And I say this humbly time after time. I'm not any smarter than anybody else. I just have more experience. And if you bring a situation, Bob, I got a really unusual situation, man, I promise you, this is really different. And after you explain it to me, I said, well, it is, except I had it just last week. And it wasn't, and because I recently had it, I've already been able to work through it, deal with it. And through some situations and kind of work through it. And later we've got a question dealing with self-disclosure notice that I kind of talk about that. Sarah?
Well, that's where you go and talk to other people who've been in business a longer time, or you, or whatever. If there's some question about something that's maybe a little bit unusual, as to what you put into this or how you explain
Yeah.
it to sellers. I mean, I do it all.
It's a good point because you're respecting that experience level. Absolutely. And a good agent, let's say you got two agents with 25 years of experience. One agent has really had 1 year of experience 25 times. Never learned anything new in the way of what she knew. The other agent has actually learned every day, every year, and they really have 25 years worth of experience. And that's the difference. So when you're talking to somebody, get a sense of what they know and what their experience has taught them, because a really good agent learns every day in every transaction. Just like in the conversations that we'll have, I'll get something new from you. I'll get something new every time I teach a contract class or any kind of class. I learn something new. And that's what you've got to do. You've got to constantly, be on that. So I would agree that the more experienced agent will include some things because of their experience level. And it may include, for example, if you're a brand new agent and you just got your license last month, what's something that you may not know an experienced agent might know? The market. I mean, if you've been in the business for a while, you've seen hundreds of houses. You know the difference between one neighborhood and another neighborhood. You know different builders. You've got information about things, experiential information. A brand new agent has got to learn that to go through the process. However, they will be able to learn it. It's truly amazing how quickly you can pick things up. If you go out and preview houses in an area, it's amazing how all of a sudden you have insights into neighborhoods, into price ranges, into what's in certain types of houses, where you can tell. I mean, when you do this for a while, you can drive through a neighborhood and you say, you know what? I know these floor plans. When I see that house, living rooms over here, bedrooms are there. I mean, you've got a sense of that because you've seen it over and over and over again. Back when I first started the business in Abilene, back in the 60s, our market in the mid 60s in Abilene was almost totally FHA, VA repos. Because one of the things that Abilene does, because it's got the Air Force Base there and 3 colleges, but most of the Air Force bases, we would overbuild and then we would stop and then we would spend all this time because we have all these foreclosures and we'd sell them. We'd get a list out every Friday of all the new houses that came on the market. Now, these were all essentially tract homes, inexpensive homes. Our average sales price was $6,500.
$6,500?
$6,500.
Oh.
$6,500. You could go through these neighborhoods and stand out in front of a house, and your only real question was, is it going to be the almond? Is it going to be the almond countertop with the kitchen appliances? Is it going to be the beige? Is the carpet going to be, you knew what, and you can stand and look and say, okay, bedrooms over here, kitchens are here, just those different, because you see them over and over and over again. Same thing with us. It won't take you that long if you'll take the time to start previewing houses and go out there. You'll say, yeah, I can drive through a neighborhood and I can tell, and you will. It's amazing how quickly you pick up on that. I'm a huge fan of agents previewing houses, looking at houses, going out and doing it. Any day that you've already done your lead generation for the morning, you've already done that, you've met your goals, go and spend a couple hours to preview houses. I mean, the market knowledge you will gain is really good. Zoomers, you want to add anything to number 2 about what experienced agents might bring to the transaction before I give you my little caution on this?
I have one.
Yeah, go ahead.
What about forms of communication and setting boundaries? I feel like as a new agent myself, you want to be, oh, I'm available anytime. Well, that kind of sets yourself up.
Yeah. One of the challenges of new versus experienced may be how busy you are and how available you are. And you're exactly right. One of the balances that you have to bring to it is that making sure a client, I say, well, you're a brand new agent, so you got to be ready anytime, anywhere. I want to see a house in 2 hours, you got to be ready. Whereas experienced agent, one of the reasons they may have chosen experienced agent, I know you're experienced, but I also know you're a very busy agent, so we got to schedule our time really carefully as you work through it. I understand the concept of wanting to be available, but you need to do that in a very measured manner You want to make sure you have that conversation up front with your client so that they're in agreement with you on when you're going to be available, when you're going to be able to show properties. It's not good service to them to let them expect to be able to have you 24/7. It's terrible. It's just not good business. So you've got to make sure that you do that. Now, having said that, we do understand when you're brand new and still trying to get your first deal going, you're going to be a little bit more available, more enthusiastic, more ready to do things. We all understand that. But you still have to balance what you're going to do. And you will find that you'll change that over time as you develop more and more business and as you work through that, do that. Now, there's another caution in dealing with experience versus new. When you go out on a listing presentation, for example, and you're going to list a property, and the seller will sometimes ask questions and say, okay, so how long have you been in the business and how many listings do you have and how much experience do you have? And you say, you know what? I got my license last month. And you're going to be my very first lister. They go, wow. Why should we list with you? Well, you know that other agent you're talking to, that experienced agent, you know what? She's got 47 listings. 47 listings. I'm sure she's got a good system where you won't just be another number. But you know what? With me, you are my whole life. You will get attention from me like you wouldn't believe. Here's the other thing. As a new agent, I've been more recently trained than that 20-year agent. I've been more trained in technology, contracts, on all those things. I've got my systems in place. I don't want to say anything bad about anybody else, but there's no way that experienced agent is going to be able to keep up with me. I've got all that stuff. I'm good. I've got it all down. And I do it nicely. Don't be in any way, kind of being critical about the experienced agent. You're going to go with whatever your strength is. If your strength is your enthusiasm, you're brand new. And by the way, it's not universally true, but the perception is there. Perception is that new agents are more enthusiastic, more eager, more energetic than those old experienced agents. It's not true across the board, but that's the perception. And use that, without being critical, use that to your advantage. Yeah, I'm new, and aren't you fortunate to be dealing with a brand new agent? Because you know what? You're my life. I mean, this is it. You're going to get attention from me like you wouldn't believe. In fact, I need to be really careful because every once in a while they complain that I'm stalking them. No, you wouldn't do that. But you will. You'll focus on that client. Like the agent who's got 47 listings couldn't do the same thing, just couldn't do it. Well, you will be able to do it. And you'll continue working through that process. So experience is not always immediately better. New is not always immediately better. It's what you do with that. It's how you as an agent make use of that. Because whatever your talents are, whatever your great expertise is, whatever it is that you've got that's plus, that's what you're going to work. That's what you're going to use. Without ever being critical about the other side, you're going to emphasize what you're really good at. Years ago, when I was doing production, I was meeting with these people. And at that point in time, I only worked with buyers, and that's all I did at that time because it was pretty much a buyer's market. And I was talking to these prospects and meeting with my office, and they had gone down the Reader's Digest list of asking questions to decide who they're going to work with. They said, well, one of the things in here is they said, you should only work with brokers. Well, I said, okay, I'm a broker. Because I've been a broker for 10 years. I said, so I'm a broker. Oh, good. Where do we sign? That was a critical thing for them. They just said, if anybody has a broker's license, they must really be good at what they do. So that's who we want to work with. Well, they were just working off of a list. But that was a strength I had. I was a broker, and I could make use of being a broker to have them decide to work with me. So whatever it is that's your little edge that you've got, don't ever be hesitant to use it in a good, positive manner, but always use it.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah, question.
I would say a truly experienced agent should bring a level of calmness to the transaction.
Yes, Larry brings up the point that a truly experienced agent could bring a level of calmness to it. And that's true because they're probably going to be fairly comfortable with anything that pops up. They're going to understand the process. They're going to know what to talk to the seller about. They're going to talk about what you're going to take with you and what you're going to leave and then going through the property and all those things. And you're going to know step by step by step. So you're going to be comfortable and calm with what you're doing. And that's going to be communicated to the prospect. And so I think a good experienced agent can do that. Now, sometimes new agents, just by their personality, they're very calm people. And they're very controlled people. There's a tendency for new people to not be as calm and to still be working through what they're going to say and what they're going to ask and what they're going through the process. We had a young man, he was probably in his early 40s, and he is a business person. He had a business. He had a distributing company where he distributed things to companies who, had Cokes and stuff like that, and he would take them to their vendor thing. And he was an exceptional businessman. He got his license. He was with us. And people were standing in line ready to do business with him. Everybody loved him. He had a great database. He worked with youth groups. He had kids in sports, and he was a coach for one of his, So, literally, people were saying, just hurry up, get your license. We need to work with you. His problem was he had to have everything perfect. He spent 2 weeks on his flyers, on his cards, on making sure everything was just right. He said, and Bob, I've got to know everything to say. I've got to know everything in the contract. I've got to understand all of it. And I tried to tell him, that will never happen. You will never be there. I'm not there. You won't be there. He couldn't get past it. And he eventually out of the business because he just couldn't get it all perfect and all right. You don't have to. What you have to do is do something. I had another young man. He came in part-time. He's with TI, full-time TI, but he was incredibly aggressive. He was going to make his work. And he started in April. In May, part-time, he had 3 listings, 2 buyers. June, he had 5 closings. Pop and go, pop and go, pop and go. Nothing was perfect. Nothing was exactly right. But what he did was he did things every day. He was doing things. He was talking. You couldn't bump into him and not know who he was and what he did. He was just that every single day, all the time. Everybody at work knew what he was doing. He got business there. He got businesses was wherever he was, anywhere. And he just kept right on going. He just pop and go and pop and go and pop and go. And so you don't have to have it perfect. You just have to do something. There's a great, one of the things that I do on the side, you may or may not know this, is I write. In fact, I'm working on a novel. It's a real estate novel. It's a murder mystery. But it's and one of the greatest pieces of advice I ever got from another writer who's successful, he's actually published. He said, Bob, there's the one most important rule in writing. And so over everything else. He said, you won't know what. I said, well, you got it. He said, no. Most important rule is you got to write. You got to write. You got to write every day. You've got to write. I don't care whether you know what you're going to write or whether you know it. If you've got to write. If you don't write, it's not the right. It's not right. In real estate, if you don't talk to people, if you don't go through that process, not the right business. You've got to recognize that's your business. You got to do it every single day. Anything else on experience or inexperience, guys?
Yeah, Bob, is that murder mystery about one of our agents?
As a matter of fact, it's about a whole lot of our agents. And one of the things that I promised, because you guys have done a great job of giving me materials for my book, and I promised to change the names to protect the guilty. Some of you are guilty. But yeah, it is. And in fact, it starts off with 2 murders that don't appear to have anything to do with real estate, but ends up to do. So I'm optimistic. I'm working my way through it. In fact, I may have to, and hopefully Marcia's not listening, but I'll have to, maybe I have to retire to really be
No.
Sorry, Marcia, work through this.
Nope.
Okay, ready for question 3? Yeah. Which of the following will tend to be the most important conversation we have with our clients? So you got some choices. The first one is, the importance of third-party financing timeline. B, what the seller has agreed to in paragraph 14. By the way, remember paragraph 14, casualty loss, has no boxes or blanks in it. He's agreed to, seller and buyer have agreed to what's there. C, the lack of importance of the number of days in paragraph A1 of the HOA addendum. D, all of the rights of termination agreed to in the contract. And E, it depends. So I'll give the lives the first shot here. Zoom, you had the last. So live folks, what do you think is the best choice here?
E depends.
E, it depends. Zoomers, what do you think is best here?
I'm going to go with E.
Me too.
But I think that I feel that C is really important too on the HOA if you're dealing with HOA.
Yeah. Okay, so but you don't like E, it depends?
Yeah, I do. I do like E, it depends.
Because what if the property doesn't have a mandatory HOA?
Right, I know, but I know all.
And what if there's no financing?
True.
There'll always be paragraph 14.
So it all depends.
It may not happen. Okay. So here's the key with these. So notice in my note here, if D is the correct answer, what might it depend on to determine an important conversation? What are the kinds of things that are happening in a transaction that help us decide on important conversations? I mean, these things we talked about, if it is a mandatory HOA, certainly understanding your choices in that addendum are important, right? Everybody would agree with that. If there is financing, understanding the third-party financing timelines, both in 2A and 2B. Everybody should always understand what's going on in paragraph 14, particularly certain times of the year where we have more possibilities of storms and, you know, weather incidents, things like that. And clearly, both sides need to know all the rights of termination that are in the contract and conditions that could cause it. So it depends on what's going on in a specific transaction that will cause you to have an important conversation. If it's an all-cash transaction, not in a mandatory HOA, then you're going to have different kinds of conversation than you would have if it's a mandatory HOA with financing. So I think it depends is the better answer because it really depends on what's going on in the transaction itself as to whether or not you're going to have some of those conversations. Is everybody semi kind of in agreement with that? Mm-hmm. Everybody good? Yep. Okay. Go to question 4. There are no conversations that are common to virtually every transaction we might do. And the note is, if this is false, what conversations could apply to virtually every transaction? Zoomers, what do you think? First of all, are there conversations that are common to virtually every transaction we might do? What do you think, Zoomers? Is that true or false?
True.
Yeah.
It's true.
You think it's true?
Yes.
Okay.
True.
So you think there are no conversations that we have in every conversation, in every transaction? So I think in every transaction you would always have a conversation about who the seller is and who the buyer is.
Representation and who we represent.
Yeah.
And who you represent, right. You're certainly going to have that conversation regardless of type of transaction. You're going to decide who you're going to represent. What about, are you going to have a conversation about the terms of an offer?
Yes.
Regardless, you're going to have that in every transaction, wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. So there are some things that in fact are common to virtually every transaction we do. There'll be conversations in virtually every transaction we do. Yes. So I would think that this number 4 is really false because there are conversations that you're going to have. Now the conversation will change, won't it? It's back to the number 3, it depends. So the conversation, but you're going to have some there's some common things. In every real estate transaction, you're going to always need to know who the seller is. You're going to always need to know who the buyer is. You're going to always need to know the property that's being sold and conveyed. There's certain things you're going to always need to know. You're going to have terms Now, the terms themselves, the conversation you have, the terms can vary dramatically, depending on the type of transaction. For example, we can even have a price that's based on a formula. We see this more in commercial and farms and ranches than we do in a residential. But there are all kinds of things that you could have in a particular transaction that could be different in one type and not the other. So that wouldn't be the same across the board. But there's some things you're going to have in every transaction.
You should always ask motivation would be something you should probably ask every buyer or seller.
Okay, so one of the things that Larry brings up is the motivation. One of the things you're always going to want to know from a seller is why they're selling. Would everybody agree with that? Would you always agree? I mean, you call from a seller, come out and make a listing presentation, make a listing presentation. Say, great, we love you. Where do we sign? Are you going to have a conversation about why they're selling? Or you say, oh, no, they're signing here. I got a price like that. I don't care why they're selling. Let's go and get it sold. You're going to have a conversation. I mean, you really are. Same thing with the buyer. One of the things that we don't ask buyers often enough, why are they buying? What's their buying situation? What are their circumstances? What are their criteria? You're going to have that conversation in every case. One of the things that we need to almost ask a seller, what makes you think you have the right to sell this property? What makes you think you own it and can convey title? Because not all sellers who think they own it do. So you got to be careful with that. Anything else before we get to 5?
Hey, Bob, we always ask motivation and timeline of every buyer.
Yeah, well, Larry brought up motivation timeline. Yep. Because you need to know if you've got a seller who needs to not give up possession for 60 days, it's really important to know if the buyer can live with something like that, isn't it? If their situations, their circumstances are, they've got to do something in a shorter period of time or they're going to be homeless. That's an important conversation you're going to have with that buyer, isn't it? And you're going to have that with every buyer across the board. Anything else that we feel like that we need to make sure we're going to ask every buyer and every seller? Anything you can think of?
Well, are you a legal person?
Are you a legal person? You didn't say foreign seller, foreign buyer. And by the way, remember, anyone can buy. You don't need to be a citizen or anyone can buy in real estate in U.S. Anyone can sell, but there may be extenuating circumstances. There may be requirements. Let's say, for example, an extreme situation that you've got a corporation that owns the property and the corporation is going to sell the property. There better be some kind of a corporate resolution signed by an actual real live person authorizing this corporation to convey title and authorizing a person to convey title on behalf of that corporation. Otherwise, you've got a problem with somebody really having the legal authority to convey title. Okay, number 5, having a conversation on an issue that your client raises is more important than a conversation on something they did not bring up. And my note here is, how would the agent know the client did not bring up an issue that needs to be discussed? They didn't say anything about it, but how would you know that it still needs to be discussed? So first of all, the question itself, having a conversation on an issue that your client raises is more important than a conversation on something they did not bring up. True or false? What do you think, Zoomers?
False.
False.
False. What do you think, live folks?
False.
Okay. So when you're saying false, you're saying that it's not more important. Is what you're telling me? I think it's true.
I think it all depends on what. I think it all depends on what questions they're raising. If it's
look at the concept number 5. 1, let's presume that you've got a good client and they raise a lot of questions. Do we need to address the questions they raise?
Sure.
Okay.
Always, yes.
Always. So
yes, always.
Is it possible that your client did not raise some questions that based on your experience should be addressed?
Absolutely.
Well, that's where we come in.
Okay, so give me an example.
A termination right they don't know they have.
Do what?
A termination right they may or may not know they have.
Okay, so there's something in there that they may have no sense of it. Let's go to something even more basic. we got to understand that we can't presume our clients understand the process. The buyer, for example, may not truly understand how an offer is made and what happens to it, and what the seller has to do on the other side for that offer to become a contract. They may not understand that process. So in the very basic, they may not ask any questions about what they have to do and when they have to write checks, earnest money options, things like that, because they're not aware. They don't know.
Also out-of-state buyers, Bob.
Do what?
Out-of-state buyers who have different contracts, inspection periods.
Different contracts, different experiences, different things that stay with the property. And you got a buyer who just moved in from another state where the refrigerator almost automatically stays, and they expect that here. Because that's what happened in the house that they sold in Florida.
Yes.
In Florida, refrigerators tend to go with the house. So you're exactly right. Their experiences elsewhere may cause them not to even bring it up here because, oh, well, this is how that works. And every state has a different form of contract with different things that are there. So one, it's clear, it's important for us to address anything they bring up. But based on your experiences, you've got to be aware of things that are important that they didn't bring up because you didn't know. For whatever reason, they didn't understand the process. And it's based on the experience from other states and other situations. They just didn't know it. But you know, they've got to understand it. And so you're making a decision that here's something important. You're also making a decision that's not only important, it's relevant. It's something that will help this client make a decision in some way, shape, or form. So you need to have that conversation. Don't just presume they understand this is how it happened. And by the way, it's not just only true from people from other states, from other areas of the state. People do things differently in El Paso than in Houston and San Antonio than in Dallas. Excuse me. So they've got different sets of experiences how they do a transaction in another area and the way they do it. So we got to be aware of that. We've got to constantly say, okay, here's something we always talk about, but they didn't bring it up, so maybe it's not important. Well, that's a judgment call on your part, and your sets of experiences are going to help you decide to the degree to which you need to talk about that. So good point. Anything else in 5 before we roll to 6?
I'll say this.
Yes, Sally.
When I say that the client is getting ready to make a horrible mistake, just because they lack information, they don't understand, that's when you address it.
So Sally says when you got a client that's about to make a really bad mistake because they still know better,
right? That's
when you really need to address it.
Yeah, like had a buyer that goes, well, I'm just not going to show up at the closing then. I'm just not going to close.
Yeah.
I'm going, the builder's just going to, let me tell you what the builder's going to do.
Yeah. So when you got a client that's about to make a really bad mistake, like not show up for closing, buyer or seller, not to do an inspection, if buyer chooses not to do an inspection, we got a form for that, inspection advisory notice that they need to sign off on. So when you got something like that that's going to do, you need to step up and say, well, let's talk about it. Now, when you got a client who says, I'm not going to close, your simple automatic, it's redundant. I mean, you can say it every single time. Here's what you need to do, loser. You need to talk to a client. You need to talk to an attorney. You've got to seek legal advice so an attorney can explain to you here are your rights and responsibilities if you choose to not follow the terms of the contract. If you choose not to perform, client gets to make that decision, by the way. Client says, you know what, screw it, I'm not doing it, I'm going, I'm out of here. And you know what, I don't care what the seller's going to do. I don't care what the builder's going to do. I don't need that money anyway. I just won the lottery and we're moving to Aruba. So what do I care? And they don't. That's okay. So, okay, well, good. So since you got all this money now, go ahead and pay my commission.
Yeah. Yeah, they're going to.
Okay, we good? So everybody, question, follow up on 5. Anybody else?
Just a question.
Yes, sir.
Do you recommend agents have a checklist of general questions so that we don't forget, or that we know, hey, we haven't touched on this item, so maybe I should bring this up now or later? But I tend to use a lot of checklists, and I find that real helpful.
You have a checklist?
I have several, actually.
Okay, so James E. McLeod, one of my favorite people, is asking about, should an agent have a general checklist on things to address in case it hadn't been addressed, and they say, well, yeah, And I just, you can't rely on yourself automatically remembering everything.
That's right.
You know, some days you're on a roll. I mean, it's one of the reasons that you've got, like, a checklist is a good idea. There's certain absolutes that you always do, because sometimes you're working an offer. It's 10 o'clock at night on a Friday night and you're brain dead. If you don't have something that kind of helps you think about what you should be doing, it doesn't get done. And that's a real challenge. So I think having a checklist is probably a good idea. And that checklist will be based on your experiences. You say, here's some things that I really need to always address. Sarah?
Would he share that with us? His checklist?
So I'm sure James Cloud would be happy.
Oh, what checklist? I don't remember any checklist.
So he'll send me an email with some suggestions for a checklist.
Let me tell you.
He's not telling us this is what you have to do. He's going to say, Bob, here's some checklist items that I found helpful in the past. And if you want to share those with your agents, James said, I'm happy for you to do that. Because it's reciprocal. I often send him things that he can make use of. So, yeah. So good follow-up.
And it gets evolved. It evolves as you get the.
Oh, it does. As you get more experience, your checklist expands. And in some cases, there'll be some things you have on checklists that, you know, I never use that. Never happens. So I just not going to do it anymore. And that's okay. Anything else before we go to 6? And number 6 is if you talk slow and speak in simple terms, the client will certainly understand what you mean since they surely are listening to you. True or false? What do you think, guys?
That's false.
What? Oh, my cynical people say, oh, Bob, they don't listen to me. Really? So what do you think, Zimmer, is true or false?
That's false, man.
Okay, so here's the important concept of this. You guys are really enthusiastic on your false, okay? I understand that. Here's one of our problems, and it's one of the things I pointed out in this particular question. You got to slow down. If you talk fast, and some of us do talk fast. I mean, every once in a while I get going, and I always remind you, if I pass something by and get talking too fast or not clear, stop me. Bob, whoa, slow down. Let's go over there one more time. Go that 2 more times, 3 more times. Do it, Bob. And I'm always happy to do it. But you got to slow down. Some of us are just quick talkers. Some of our most knowledgeable agents in our office. I mean, one of our agents and not in my top 10%, top 10. Just I go, slow down. I didn't get that last, that you said. And so it's just your natural style. That's just how you talk. It's how you do it. You got to slow down. And now, the other part of this is they surely are listening to you. My note here is, how does an agent know if their client is listening to them? How do you know?
Ask questions.
Ask questions. What kind of questions? Open end or closed end?
Typically closed end about the topic that you possibly just covered.
Well, I want to be a little careful about closed end, because on a closed end question, their answer can be yes or no. And you may not get quite the information you're looking for. I agree, questions are the absolute correct thing. To know whether or not they're listening, ask a lot of questions. The more open-ended questions you can ask, the more information you're likely to get. So you're absolutely correct. The way you know if they're listening is you ask questions as you work through the process. If you don't ask questions, how are you going to know they're listening to you? Because, sometimes you can tell. If you're in a face-to-face meeting, you can tell when they zoomed out on you. And one of the most aggravating things in the world is they're sitting there looking at their phone. They're texting. And you're trying to talk to them about something important, and they're just. Well, how about you, Cowboys? Okay, it's just terrible.
You could ask a question that leads them to the wrong answer and let them correct you.
Okay, so Larry says you can ask them questions and lead them to the wrong answer so you can correct them. Give me an example, Larry. Caught him.
Caught me off guard there.
Larry, I'd only say that sometimes people remember what they want to hear. And if they hear the wrong thing, they may grab on that and think that was the correct thing. And overlook the fact that you corrected them later. So you want to be careful with that. I tend to do that.
Well,
but you said
that's true. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, even if they're listening and paying attention and give all the cues that they're hearing what you're saying, they haven't gone through all the traumatic transactions that you've been through. And it's not real to them until they're in the middle of the drama and they experience it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's true. People, when operate on a theoretical level, they don't get it. They don't understand it until it's actually an experience. We do the same thing. You know, when we teach on some forms and go through some processes and how to fill things in, you know, you get it up here, but until you experience it, you don't really know it. You really don't. And this gets a little bit into question 7, but you're right. You ask the questions, you listen, you go through the prospect, because my little bit of a follow-up question. 1, do we want them to be listening to us? Do we want them to listen to us? Because here's what should be happening in the interaction, the conversation. Maximum from your side, 1/3. Their side, 2/3. Maximum, 1/3.
What they're hearing or what they're deciding.
Well, listening's different.
Yeah. So when you go through the conversation, Abe Lincoln had an interesting quote where he talked about when he was getting ready to have a conversation, work through it, he spent 1/3 of his time thinking about what he was going to say. He spent 2/3 of his time thinking about what the other side was going to say. So his focus was on them, what they were going to say, so he could listen to what they were doing. It was different than his expectation. Then it was clear. And he said, oh, wow, okay, I just learned something new there. So when you go through the process and you're talking 1, it is important for them to listen to you because your conversation, your speaking to them should be minimal. Your majority of your time should be listening. So when you do say something, it's really important to hear it, that you're listening. And so you need to make sure you understand that if in fact they really are listening to what you say. Because if it was important on any level at all, they should hear it. It's one of the reasons we'll talk later about documentation. And one of the functions of documentation is it helps you prove up a conversation. So we all are on the same page with what we thought we said. So this kind of leads us a little bit into number 7. Unless anybody has any follow-up on 6. Does everybody agree it's important for them to listen to us? Yes, go ahead.
I have a comment.
Okay, comment over here, Sally.
Well, I think body language is also important.
Very important.
And so it's sort of like, I read this thing that said, despite the look on my face, why are you still talking?
Despite the look on my face, you're still talking.
Why are you
tell I'm through? Why are you still talking when I'm through listening?
Right.
Yeah. In fact, the number in all the training that we get about nonverbal is from 80 to 90% of all communication is nonverbal.
Really?
Yeah. Huge number. Huge number. You know where you can see this and evidence of this? All the ads for all the medications that you take, and then all of the side effects. They show the people happy and doing things, and that's all nonverbal. And then you got the text under there that says, oh, by the way, you could die. You take this, you could die. And everybody's happy and everybody's good. That's the nonverbal. And the little written text, that's the verb. And people, they're hoping that people are happy, watching these happy people who are taking this medication. Everything is great. And they miss the fact that they've got all these side effects that could kill them. We're good. Okay, so this kind of gets us a little bit into number 7 about every conversation. Because virtually every conversation has at least 3 versions. What they heard you say, what you heard you say, and what you actually said. True or false?
True.
When it's true, as a minimum, it's true. And my note here, are any of the above 3 versions more important than the others? And if so, how does an agent know? How do you know that what you think you heard you say is what they heard you say? How do you know? Because it's going to be different, isn't it?
Ask questions.
You'll ask questions, you'll pay attention to them. If you've ever been in a conversation and had the opportunity, and it's happened to me several times, where I'm the third party and these people are having a conversation. I've had this happen at home, my family, where my wife said something to one of my daughters and back and forth. And I'm sitting there listening.
Are you being recorded right now?
I am, so don't get this to Elizabeth. I'm in big trouble. And so as I'm listening to them, I go back, I'm thinking, you know what? They don't know this is what they actually said. Here's what my wife thinks she just said. Here's what my daughter thinks she just heard. But this is what was actually said. They used a different word. We do this. Sometimes we'll say seller when we mean buyer. Sometimes we'll say contract when we mean offer. We'll go through that process. So the reality is, it is absolutely true that there's always this in the middle. One of our challenges is we'll hear ourselves say certain things, and the reason it's different than what the other side heard is because it's all in your mind. You're clear in your mind, this is what I said. And that's not what anybody else heard. And so you've got to have some confirmation about the questions to make sure that what you really meant to say. And you're right, you're going to ask questions, you're going to follow up. That's why if you give really important advice to a client, you're going to follow up with an email confirming, having documentation on here's what I actually said. Here's what we agreed to. Here's what we're going to do. That way you've got, so everybody's on the same page. You work through it because it's a challenge. And it happens not just every once in a while, it happens all the time. All the time. We work through it because we all know, we all understand the rule. Not everyone hears what you say. We understand that concept. Is everybody on board with that? People don't hear what you say.
Especially if your client is a husband or wife.
Yeah, they don't hear what you say. Yeah, there's another part of that. People hear more than what you've said. Yep. They read something into it, you see it from their perception. So they hear more than what you've said. So does everybody agree that number 7 is true? That there are at least 3, and there may be more as you work through it. Anything added before we get to number 8, which is a multiple choice? And number 8, house has a pool as on a creek lot. Which of the following conversations should you not have with your buyer client? A, you should advise the buyer to have a pool specialist inspect the pool in addition to the pool equipment. B, you should advise the buyer to have a landscaping retaining wall contractor inspect the land near the creek. C, you should advise the buyer to consider having a structural engineer do a reading on the house for any movement due to the house being on a creek lot. D, you should advise the buyer that creek lots have lots of downsides, such as flooding, mosquitoes, and a variety of wildlife from the creek. So which one of these are you not going to have?
D for Denton.
Yeah, D for Denton. D for Denton. Hello, Denton. Maybe you could go ahead as you leave, close the door, keep the riffraff out.
You don't want any interruptions.
I don't.
Higher learning. Don't forget your liquid paper.
By the way, you know what I do? What?
Liquid paper. In case you need a fixed contract.
You know what I just noticed? You know what I just noticed in this class? Maybe they're on Zoom. You know anyone on your team is here?
They're busy right now. That's why you have your cell phone, Bob.
And he's right. I've got everybody in his team on my caller ID. So, okay. So it is D. So all the rest are things that you're going to have a conversation about. Your conversations in this question is really going to be based on your experience. One of our agents had the buyer on a house, creek lot, and in this particular situation, wasn't a pool issue, it was a backyard issue. And there was a retaining wall at the back part of the yard, and there were some real challenges, and over time, that retaining wall just went away, it went out. and the buyer was really unhappy with it and was a real problem. This happened within the first year after they bought the property. And so our agent said, you know, I mean, as it turns out, the buyers didn't blame us, didn't blame our agent for not advising them. But our agent said, you know, on any other properties like this in the future, I want to tell the buyers that we need to do some things. Things could happen. And it's risky. Creek lots, retaining walls, those kinds of things, all kinds of things could happen. So based on your experiences, you're going to have a different conversation. Now, it is true that creek lots have downsides. I mean, they really do. You always want that creek lot, and, you know, but there are a whole lot of people that say, I will never have another creek lot. I mean, just never go through that again. It's just like we had a, back in the old days in this office, we used to do tours of listings.
Broker tours.
Yeah, property tours. And we were out looking, and we had like 4 or 5 houses. We'd go and everybody went along. We'd give an evaluation to the listing agent, talking about it, price is good and bad, all that kind of stuff. And we were, one of the properties we had listed was on Crossbend. And Crossbend is a really busy east-west street in Plano. And one of the agents, fairly new agent, we were standing outside, you know, looking at it, said, who in the world would buy a house on a busy, high-traffic street like this? I said, well, look up and down. Every one of these houses, somebody's living in. Somebody has bought these houses. Now, and not only was it on busy, it was that part where the street that went into the alley, it was right at the corner there. So here's, you have a little street that goes to the back alley for everybody right there. The buyer who bought it was a single guy, and he had previously lived in a house back in an area in a cul-de-sac, back in a subdivision. It was all windy streets, everything. He said, it took me 10 minutes to get from my house to a street. He said, I love the fact here, it's right there, out of my garage, on the street and go. He wanted that busy street. He wanted that. That's what worked for him. So, you know, looking at something and saying, well, you know, nobody would ever want that. You can't presume that.
It depends where you are on that.
It does. It depends on where you are. And it depends on what your needs are. And, you know, it's just absolutely, you're absolutely correct. Some areas Crossbend are far different than others, for sure.
So why wouldn't you have conversation number D?
Right. When would you have conversation number D?
Why wouldn't you have that? I thought you said not to have that conversation.
Oh, you shouldn't. You shouldn't have. Here's my challenge with D. That's why I put it in here. There's a balance between advising your client. Here's some aspects of a creek lot. Not here are the downsides. You're not going to go down the list of negatives. Here's why you shouldn't buy a house on a creek lot. Okay. Here are all the bad parts. Say, here are the aspects of this. Here are things you need to be aware of. Now, here are things that you need to understand. First of all, your land goes up to the creek lot, and there could be, you know, it could be a retaining wall there. You probably want to have that checked out with the process. You need to be aware of these factors. You need to understand that creek lots are mosquito magnets, and they are. So all kinds of wildlife. But certain areas of you'll see critters, so like that, maybe you could fish, you know, whatever. But you want them to understand some of the aspects of it. Now, creek lots are attractive to a whole group of buyers. A whole group of buyers that when they give you the criteria, say, you know, we love a creek lot, we'd love a big backyard, we'd love a. Now, having said that, you in some way have reduced the pool of buyers because there are a whole group of buyers who would not buy a creek lot. Because one of your challenges with creek lots is everything's out front. You're not going to have an alley in the back. You work through that. Everything's out front. And then we say, you know, I don't like it. I like the privacy back. So you're going to change that. But you see, you have to understand the aspect. You're not going to go down the downside, the negative side. Go with that. Because that could be a little bit of a challenge, unless you're just that kind of person. You have any creek lots in Salina?
No, I should tell you all the downsides of that. Yes, we do have a few.
And Frisco, we got Maxwell Creek, working through a big part of West Frisco. And which used to be a real problem with all the lead battery plant. Number 9, you should have a conversation with your buyer client about how much weight they can attach to the square footage in MLS. True or false? Zoomers or Yank? Is this an important conversation about the square footage? And the buyer looks at, okay, good, 3,200 square feet, this says an MLS. And I'm going to base the price and everything based on that. So that's important information. So your buyer is placing a lot of emphasis on the correct square footage they see in MLS. So should you have a conversation with them about that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. One of our challenges, we do our CMAs, we're doing it on a per square foot basis. You know, in fact, you'll be looking and say, okay, your CMA shows in this area 115 per foot. Is that price? That's kind of high for this area. It really tops out about 110. And all of a sudden, they're equating price for square footage, and they're using that as an emphasis. So if this is an important thing for them, in spite of the fact in the seller's disclosure notice, there's a statement in there that talks about square footage. We've got an actual square footage notice form that we can use when you've got a buyer with, that's a really important thing. Our challenge is the buyer needs to understand the square footage in MLS. The seller is not saying that's how many square feet I have in this property. The seller is saying that's what this specific source says. Could be a tax roll, could be an appraiser. The worst you don't ever want to have it happen is you don't want, because it's 20 pull downs, should never be the owner. So, yeah, here's some square. I just know that's what we got. I measured it myself. Don't ever want to go. And the most accurate estimate number is ever going to be is the appraisal. Even square footage based on an appraisal from when they bought the property could be different on the next appraisal. So your buyer needs to understand, you know, all you're seeing here is here's what the seller is saying based on this source. Here's what they say it is, but you're going to have an appraisal, and you should have an appraisal whether you get financing or not. And this is going to determine, you know, here's your square footage, help you base the price on it. So you've got to listen to your client and see how much they're using the square footage, because they're going to use it from your CMA. Decide here's how much I'm going to offer based on all the, you know, like 115, 110, you know, 100 per square foot on your CMA. So, yeah, man, I don't want to buy a house for 120 per square foot. That's terrible.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do. Okay, so here's what you have to remind them. You walked through the house. You saw the room sizes. You see what's there. It doesn't matter whether it's 3,200 or 3,100. You need to make sure the house is that size that works for you based on how you live in the house and use it and so forth. So you may well pay that much more. Everybody good with 9? Everybody understand that you should have that conversation? That's true. Is everybody good with true? Number 10, which of the following is truest? And I'm really surprised I haven't been given a hard time yet about the word truest, because often I give people say, Bob, that's not even a real word. Well, it is. You Google up truest. It's actually now, it used to not be, but it is. And I do that based on a friend of my wife than me, but anyway. Bill just makes up words. People say, that's not a real word. He said, listen, if you knew what it meant, then it's a good word. When I use it and you understand what I'm saying, it's good. Now, Bill has a doctorate in physics from UT. He also has a law degree from UT. He's a patent attorney. He deals with new and different words all day long. So it's understandable why he would make up words. He said, you know, if this is a good word and you understand what I meant, then it's a good word. And we all have different words that drive us nuts. One of my words, and you use it in front of me, I'll sometimes say something depending on how it's going. You say, yeah, Bob, we had a problem with the hot water heater. Now, what's my problem with that phrase, hot water heater?
Why do you need to heat hot water?
Why are you going to heat hot water? You're exactly right, Noah. I mean, it's hot. That's why we call it hot water. Now, what you should say is water heater. a problem with the water heater. It's not heating the water. This is what the water should be heated. So, you know, but that's, I mean, that's just think about it. It's kind of redundant anyway. Okay, so number 10, which of the following is truest? A, without exception, every conversation you have with a client must be documented in some manner. B, only conversations that constitute advice need to be documented in some manner. C, only conversations including advice that the client ignores or completely disagrees with must be documented. Surely they wouldn't do that. Okay. D, the agent decides on a risk management basis which conversations need to be documented. The agent is always aware of the possible need to document a conversation with a client. Which of these do you guys like the best?
D, but it should say Bob Baker's risk management basis.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. So you make a judgment call. You're not going to, you know, maybe you and them are having a conversation, but it looks like the Cowboys got back on track and finally won another game. And so you're not going to document that conversation. You know, follow, but okay, I will have an email that documents the fact that we talked about the Cowboys and we got that. But you get to make the judgment call, but it's going to be on a risk management basis. Because just like your clients, when they make decisions, every decision of your client should be based on a risk assessment. They need to make a decision about what their risks are and make a decision based on the information you've given them. So they need to have an informed consent based on their assessment of the risk they have. We'll talk about this when we'll talk about dealing with self-disclosure and dealing with death of somebody, and we'll talk about it at 12, but I'll follow up on that. But you're absolutely, I think D is the best. You make that risk management call, and you do need to do that. I mean, you really should go through the process. You need to make sure that, and don't rely on says, well, that wasn't really technically advice. I was just kind of telling them stuff. You really do have to think about it. I don't have a real downside to documentation except for one thing. If we have a TREC complaint or a lawsuit, they're going to want all of your emails, which means all of your documentation. So if you do all that, it's all discoverable. In a lawsuit, it's going to show up as discoverable and something that may show up in deposition. So that's the only little downside about it.
Hey, Bob,
question.
Our oldest daughter's always said, don't document in an email anything you don't want read back to you in a deposition.
Yeah, that's true. You want to be careful not to document something that you don't want to hear from the judge later. Yeah. Okay, number 11. The primary reason we have a conversation with our clients is CYA, in fact, cover your assets. True or false?
False.
False. What do you think, Zoomers? True or false?
False.
False. Why? What is our primary reason to have a conversation if it's not cover your assets? Why are you having a conversation with your clients?
Service your client.
Service your client. James is right. We operate at the very highest level in serving our clients, performing our fiduciary duties when we do the conversation. CYA is a side effect. CYA happens when you're operating at the highest level of service to your client. When you're performing your fiduciary duties at the highest level, that's the most effective risk management. Now, it's not the most effective. You may remember, as I've talked about in other classes, what the single most effective thing you can do in risk management. You may remember?
Be likable.
Be likable. Absolutely correct. People don't file complaints, don't sue people they like. Now that sounds silly, but I've seen it over and over and over again. So if you're likable, in fact, this is so important, I think we need to have a class on how to be likable. Our problem is we don't know who's going to teach it, so we're going to work through that.
You can teach it.
Work through that. Okay, so 12, if a seller discloses to us that a death occurred on the property, you need to advise the seller that the law requires the disclosure of the death to a prospective buyer And note the law that I'm referring to here is the Texas Property Code. Is that true or false? Death occurred on the property, does the seller have to disclose it?
False. Depends.
Depends on what?
Depends on what kind of death.
Okay, give me an example.
Natural causes versus traumatic incident or suicide or something.
Okay, so natural versus murder.
Right.
How about suicide?
Yeah.
There is no downside to disclosing. That's not part of what is required.
Okay, so here are the three deaths. Here are the three deaths do not have to be disclosed. You're correct on the first one. Natural causes. Second, suicide does not have to be disclosed. Third, death that did not occur as a result of the condition of the property. So nothing in the property didn't cause the death. But the property code does not require the seller or the listing agent to disclose deaths from those three causes. It's actually addressed in the Texas Realtor Seller Disclosure Notice. It's addressed in Section 5.008 Property Code. Now, having said that we have evolved over many years our policy on disclosing deaths. We used to have a policy that any death, regardless, you had to disclose it. If a seller didn't give you permission to disclose it, you couldn't take the listing. Any death, even though there are those three that the property code says, no, you don't have to do it. Because there's risk. And there are areas, particularly in the area of suicide. Buyers have sued sellers failing to disclose suicide. Disclosure of violent deaths, disclosures of haunted houses. If the house is haunted, there was a case out of the Carolinas, South and North Carolina, I forget which one, in which the buyer sued the seller because he didn't disclose it was a haunted house. Now, where the seller got in trouble is he actually was interviewed for an article in a magazine about his haunted house. And everybody knew about it except this couple who bought the house. So, you know, we bought a house that everybody knows is haunted. This is going to create a stigma to the property. And that's the key, a death that creates a stigma. And, you know, we've always said, well, suicide could create a stigma, but the law does not require disclosure of suicide. So when you look at this, and you look at this particular question as you work through it, the law does not tell the seller they have to disclose deaths that occurred on the property unless it's a violent death, unless it's a murder, for example, because that creates a stigma. But if it's those three causes I just mentioned, so it's not required to disclose it. And if you disclose it, then you've got a liability with the seller. The seller can come after you for disclosing something that the law did not require you to disclose. So our policy has evolved so that now, when there's a death that's occurred on the property, we find out what happens, what the situation was. And we discuss with our seller the risk. If you fail to disclose this, here's the risk, here's what could happen. So I say, well, that's pretty minimal. I've barely ever heard of anybody suing anybody over that, so I'm okay with not disclosing it. So then we look at our risk. And if our seller accepts the risk, and they're willing to move forward and sell the property without disclosure, chances are we also will accept the risk. We probably say, yeah, as long as we don't think this was the first of several red flags with the seller. Other things he's choosing not to disclose. So now we look at it, we see what's going on, and we decide whether or not it's going to be an issue or not an issue. When there are violent deaths on a property, we do understand that creates a stigma in dealing with that situation.
Question. Non-violent death, or the seller makes a decision to take the risk. Do we bring that to you, or is that an agent decision?
You bring it to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. When you have a situation where you're going to take a listing and a death has occurred on the property, and you've had the conversation with your seller, they say, yeah, okay, and we're okay with that. And by the way, you want that document or an email to confirm that. Give me a call. It'll be a fairly short call. And the question that I will ask you after you explain to me, here's what the situation is, I will ask you, so how do you feel about that listing? How do you feel about that seller? Is this a good seller? Is this a good listing that you want to deal with? Or is this the first of many pink flags? And now it's a red flag. And we'll go with whatever you think, because you're the one that's there. You're the one that interacts with the client. And, we'll trust your judgment in that and we'll go along with it. Does that help with that? Yeah, make the phone call. Because, I don't want to be blindsided later when I get the demand letter. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know about it at all. So it'll be very good. And by the way, we've had some meetings this week, leadership here. And this might be a good example. When you're going to call me or check in with me on something important like that, you need to also copy Jill Roderick, our team leader, because sometimes my circumstances are such that I can't get back to you in a timely manner. And if she's copied on it and it's something happening that you really need to talk to somebody about, having her also on there will help us take it to the next step. Because, sometimes my situation is just that I just can't answer you, can't do it right then. I might be in a class with some really important people. Like I am right now. So please also copy Jill on that. And back in the old days before we had Jill, sometimes people would copy Mike or Dick. Probably not a good idea.
So Bob, what's in the nonviolent death situation where you're okay with this and the buyer ends up suing?
Okay, so Larry brings up, we've made the decision, we've made the risk-based decision that we're okay with the risk. And so we go ahead and represent the seller, close on the deal, and the buyer sues. The buyer sues the seller and sues us. Well, when they sue the seller, we already say, you know what? Here's the documentation where you agreed to the risk. In our situation, we just turn it over to our E&O.
Because we're covered by the property code.
Yeah, property code protects us. So this was not a disclosure that we were required to do. It also protects the seller. Yeah, so they're now required to do that. Everybody, question? Yes, Jennifer?
So this is a little extreme, but again. So what if there is not on the listing that you're actually going to take, but on that street or close by, there was a notorious, horrible murder?
Yeah.
What?
So the question is, what if there was something in that immediate neighborhood that occurred that may have created a stigma for that street, for that property? You got to make the judgment call, because this could be a material fact that a buyer would need to know. And you've got to talk with your seller and decide, say, here's what we need to do. Seller may say, you know what, it's had nothing to do with my property, and so I want to do it. We look at the risk. We say, what are the chances? Because the question you always ask is, if you had the buyer, would the buyer like to know? Well, if you had the buyer's agent should be doing some research. Buyer's agent should be familiar with that market area, should be familiar with what's going on. This is one of the risks, by the way, of taking that buyer down, to some area that you don't normally go, down to Mansfield. You don't know about that horrible thing that happened on that street. Local agent would know that. You don't. I think we've got some liability there. So I think you've got to look at everything that's going on and see the degree to which this is something that's a real challenge.
Bob, I noticed a house come up for sale in Oak Cliff that possibly met a investor's needs. And because of my knowledge, I realized that was the house right next to Lee Harvey Oswald's boarding house. And there are tours that come up every day.
Oh, really?
Go by that house.
Okay, so you have awareness of that. So you would advise your buyer client
that here's what's going on.
Here's what's going on. Buyer's client says, no, fine, I don't care. We're good. Our buyer says, I don't want to be in the middle of that. Yeah, good point.
If you're representing the state on the state,
yeah,
I mean, presumption is someone has died.
Someone died. Yep.
To what extent do you?
Well, here's the interesting thing. James brings up the estate situation. Our agent had the buyers. It was an estate sale. And the buyers actually were in a contract, knew it was an estate sale. I said, you know what? Now that we're aware, we realize that we're going to terminate the contract because we just can't be involved in a property in which a death occurred. It was an estate sale. They knew somebody had died. And we did a little research and we said, yeah, we say they died, but they died in the hospital. Doesn't matter if there's a death associated with the property, we don't need part of it. You know, what can you do? Some people in certain cultures, anything on any level at all associated, they just shy away from. And you know, you got to respect whatever they're just. I just want them to communicate it right up front, so we can not take them and show them properties that just don't work for them at all.
So that could be on that checklist.
Could be on the checklist. Yeah, if you kind of work through that, ask about the deaths and all. Okay, so everybody good with the deaths? Number 13, when the seller receives a copy of an inspection report from a buyer and the buyer terminates, then the property code requires the seller to update his seller disclosure notice. True or false?
Only if they're notified.
Only if they're notified what?
Only if you give them the inspection report from the buyer who bought the inspection report.
So them being you, the agent?
No, the buyer has to give permission for you to give them the inspection report to the listing agent.
So let's say the buyer did send the listing agent the inspection report. So the listing agent has it, which means the seller has it. So is the seller now required to update the seller disclosure notice?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Depends on what's in the inspection report.
Okay, so here's our challenge. Nothing in the property code requires a continual updating of a seller's disclosure notice. And updating is a tricky word. What the property code does require is the seller disclosure notice that the seller has to disclose any new information they have. So if the inspection report, kind of James's point, if there's information in the inspection report that is currently not included in the seller's disclosure notice, he's got to do something to disclose that to the next buyer. Now there's a Texas Realtor one-page form, update the seller disclosure notice that can be used. Seller can put all that new stuff on there. The other way that I like is that the seller takes that inspection report, attaches it to their seller's disclosure notice, and makes note in the seller's disclosure notice, see attached inspection report. So now the next buyer has all that information on that report that the seller has. Now we let the buyer go ahead and make that research and do it. There's no actual technical requirement to update. It's just a requirement for the seller to make sure their seller's disclosure notice reflects what they know. And remember, a seller's disclosure notice is done as a specific date. And so it's what the seller knew on that date where he signed it. When he learns about new information later, he's got to have some means of providing that information to the next buyer. Sarah?
If you tell the other, the buyer's agent not to send it to you and they send it to you anyway, then do you have to open it and use it?
Okay, so Sarah asked the question. We've had this conversation with a number of good attorneys. The listing agent said to the buyer's agent, don't send it, we don't want it. By the way, I agree with that. I don't want it on the seller side. And they send it anyway. The agent have it, your seller had it. Well, I never opened it. Of course, I don't agree with that. Court say you got it, that's it. There's no way for you to prove that you didn't open it. And Texas Realtors and Texas in the FAQs where they talk about disclosures, they say, it's not enforceable unless the buyer and the seller have agreed in the contract that the buyer cannot send that to the seller without the seller written permission. They can send it. And they send it to try to get some leverage or just out of spite or whatever. When they send it, you got it and you have to deal with it.
So where would you put, do not send me the seller?
Well, what you would do when the buyer makes an offer in special provision, the seller can put in their counter offer, buyer agrees to not provide any inspection report to the seller without seller's written permission. Put in special provisions of the contract. Yeah. Otherwise, you got a problem. So we just need to make the distinction between updating and the obligation to disclose any and all new information.
So the answer is false, correct?
Yes, it is false.
Thank you.
Because the technical word update is not included anywhere in the property code. So 14, the conversation you have with your buyer recommending the buyer have a follow-up inspection prior to closing to verify repairs. In other words, to do a re-inspection. That the repairs have been completed as agreed to is more important than the decision the buyer makes regarding the follow-up inspection. True or false?
True.
I've got a true over here.
True.
It is more important. We have, and you're going to have documentation on this. It's more important that our client be advised to do a reinspection. They get to choose what they're going to do. You don't have to. You have to advise. This is one of several absolutes. In every case where you represent the buyer, you have to advise your buyer. Whether they do inspection, didn't do it, doesn't matter. You've got to advise them before they close, do a reinspection. They choose not to do it, you cannot choose to not advise them. That's the more important part, because that's the best level of service to your client. And by the way, that is an important CYA. Very important. Okay, 15. If the buyer's agent tells the listing agent that there are foundation problems with the house, the listing agent must advise the seller that he must now disclose that fact to another potential buyer. True or false?
False.
Depends.
False.
Got some falses here. Is that it? Anything else? Everybody reads false? Jennifer, did you say what? True?
I'm saying that it depends, because.
What do you have to do?
Well, you need to have the inspection.
Okay, so here's your concept. What you've got is a buyer's agent on the deal that we had, and they've gone away or getting ready to go away or trying to negotiate repairs and a repair amendment during an option period. And the buyer's agent calls you up and said, you know, you got foundation problems here, serious foundation problems. So you might as well work with us, because now that you know you have foundation problems, you got to tell all the other buyers. If I have an inspection report, if I've got a foundation company report, if I got a structural engineer's report, they were going to say, what I'm going to do with that buyer's agent, I'm going to say to my seller, here's what the buyer's agent says. You need to think about whether or not that's true. You know, do you have foundation problems? You know, what's your thought there? It does not rise to the level of disclosure, because it's not a professional's opinion. It's a buyer's agent who's just trying to negotiate a better deal. Same thing with the neighbors. You have neighbors come over and say, hey, by the way, did you know, did you finally get all the termites taken care of? They had termites, man. We were afraid they were going to come over to our house, and they may have never had termites. Buyers are mad at them, just the next door neighbor mad at them, trying to get rid of them, whatever. So you got to just be careful. So you need, the seller needs to understand the things that rise to the level of disclosure and the things that are just someone else's opinion. That makes sense. So to one degree, Jennifer's right, it kind of depends, but what you're gonna do is have the conversation. Your seller may say, wow, and you know, we'd kind of wondered about that because we'd noticed some hairline cracks, things like that. You know, we appreciate him saying that. What we're gonna do is we're gonna have a foundation company come out, or a structural, we're gonna have it inspected. We're gonna have it checked out. The seller may decide to do that. Then if he has that information, then he's got to deal with it. That makes semi-sense. One of your challenges, by the way, and we've had several cases of this, where a seller has an inspection report, has his foundation company come out, and foundation company say, yeah, it's, you know, 20 piers, you need $6,500. And I better get a second opinion. Get another one, so I said, 10 piers, you know, $2,000, you know, whatever. And he ends up with 3 reports with different, you know, recommendations. So I said, well, I like this last report because it's only $900. Seller doesn't get to pick and choose. Every report he's got has to go to the buyer. He doesn't get to just give the ones that are to his benefit, his favor. He's got the report, got to deal with it, got to disclose it. 16, a conversation we have with our clients may take the form of a statement or advice, or it may be in the form of questions, true or false. I'm hearing some true. So can questions be used to create a conversation, to be in the form of a conversation, part of a conversation?
Yes.
Remember, conversations are two-way.
Yeah.
And questions can be very important. Remember, in a conversation, not only what you say, in question, not only what you ask, but how you ask it. You sit down with clients, okay, I got my checklist here. Got it, name's Dean. 15 items. You got 15 items. Let's down. You're not going to do that. You're not going to say, okay, I got to answer this, this, and this, and this. That's not how you're going to do it. You're going to do it in a very rapport building way and work through the process and deal with it. So conversation can be in any of those forms. Now, I'm a fan of questions that are open-ended questions because you're asked for information. Closed-end statements can often be answered with a yes or no. When I do negotiation classes, we talk about some of the most effective negotiators in the world. Guess who they are? Teenagers. Because teenagers have a response that's almost impossible to get past. Whatever. You tell them what to do, you know shit, just whatever. How do you get past whatever? There's no way to get past whatever. You know, you can't negotiate past it. And it's just, you know, and I've got several children, grandchildren, teenagers, something you have to keep going through, whatever. But same thing here is you have the questions. When I ask a question, what I really want is information. Now, sometimes the information could be a yes or a no, depending on the specifics of it. Most of the time, I want something more than that because I want it to be used to get them going. Because remember, 1/3 from me, 2/3 from them. And I really want them to go down that road. 17, explain the risk in the transaction is generally an easy conversation with the client because they really want to know what all the risks are. And they appreciate an agent who will bring all the risks to their attention. What do you think? True or false?
It's false.
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 Yeah, they're going to get rid of you and
It's
get
not an
another
easy
agent who doesn't
conversation.
bring up all those trouble. Go ahead. Zoomer, what? What'd you say? Yes, Laura? Did you say something on this?
No, Chantel did, but she did say, she said it was not an easy conversation.
No, it's not at
Yes,
all.
I did.
You're
Yes.
good. And they're going to blame you, aren't they?
Yes.
Somebody else brought up all those risks.
That's what I run into a lot, Bob. They're like, you're sure telling me a lot of stuff no one else did.
Yeah. Here's the key. There are some things that no one else has brought up that you do need to bring up, that you do need to know. And there's a great little phrase that you use in conjunction with it. I've said it over many, many times. When you tell them something and you can tell by their response, their looks at know that, to know if I wanted to know that, you say, you know what? I know you talked to some other agents. I found that all of the top agents would have told you this. You've included yourself in the group of top agents and you're the only one that's brought it up. So you're going to do it in a rapport building way. If you just keep going down the list of negative, 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 they're going to say you is creating a problem. And they're going to find an agent they can work with who's not going to create all those problems. So you have to be very careful in the way in which you discuss risk as you work through it. You're going to make that judgment call, that risk management judgment call on talking about risk. Don't just presume if you perceive it as a risk, there's going to be a risk for anybody. So don't presume that's the case. Everybody good? 18. If the information in the conversation would not affect our client's decision in the transaction, then it's okay to not have that conversation. And the note is, this presumes the agent knows what items would affect the client's decision. So what do you think? Is this true or false?
False.
Why is it false?
There might be things they need to know, even if it doesn't affect their decision.
Well, first of all, you don't know. You don't know what will affect their. You will, or you have had, and you will have a buyer who's got a price range. And they can't go over 400,000. That's just it, based on the money they have, it just can't do it. And you work through the process and you're showing them houses that top out. Because that's their numbers. It's what they can do. And then they see some houses that are 500,000. And they realize that that's what we really want. All of a sudden money shows up. And we didn't know they had. There are things that are going on with that client that we just don't know about. And so we have to be very careful. Say, well, not really. Yeah, maybe it is. So you have to continue to go through that process and just keep.
So I'm sorry, was that true or false?
Pardon me? What do you think? What is it? Is it true or false?
I thought it was false. I think it's false.
I agree. I think it is false. It's not okay to have a conversation because you don't know everything that would affect their decision, do you? There are all kinds of things that could affect their decision that you're not yet aware of. Now you will be, because you're going to have the conversations as you work through the process. Now, having said that, here's the balance, and I can't overemphasize this. You will make decisions constantly for your client based on an evaluation, based on your decision-making. You're going to make a decision for your client on what you're going to tell them, what you're going to show them about things in the transaction. You're making decisions for the client. You better be right. Sometimes those decisions are what you don't tell them. You better be right. Because if it's something they really should know, you better have told them. Because one of the worst phrases that we'll hear in a track complaint or in a lawsuit, when your client says to the judge, well, I didn't really understand any of that. I just trusted my agent to tell me everything I needed to know. I just trusted my agent. So I said, well, yeah, you ought to be able to trust your agent. Well, they never told us about that. Oops. So you better be right as you work through it. And that can be very, very hard. So 19, knowing which conversations to have with our clients is as important as having the conversations. What do you think, true or false? True, it's very true. And then 20, the best way for an agent to understand the concept of conversations is to be familiar with the Kellogg publication, Guide to Effective Client Conversations, true or false?
I think that's false.
What?
I think that's false.
Why is it false?
I was joking.
Well, it is false.
We don't have a guy, do we?
Because there is no such thing. We should have one. We should have one.
Right?
We should have one, but we don't.
Tricky Bob.
You're not writing that? I need to write one of those so we can say it true. 20. Okay, guys, any last minute conversations, questions, or anything that you've got? You've done a great job, James Dean.
When is your next negotiation class?
Okay, I do need to have a negotiation class, don't I? Maybe in January, when I do my 2 classes in January, maybe we can make one of them a negotiation class. Yeah, so we, let's make sure you have the dates. Because those are important skills that we need to make use of and work through and deal with it.
Well, I got collected 15 on the foundation.
Okay, so Larry, is that okay, Marcia?
Marcia's gone. So I took
advantage of our situation. Okay, number 15.
You mentioned having 3 inspection reports. 900, 2000, and 6,000.
3 foundation reports.
3 foundation reports.
Yeah.
Why can't the seller just do the $900 fix and put it back on the market as fixed?
Okay, so
do they have to disclose the other 2 reports?
Yeah. Okay, so the question that Larry, in his sneaky mode, is coming up with. So the seller's got 3 foundation reports. There's a cheap one for $900, and the seller does that repair. In the seller disclosure notice, the seller has to disclose all previous structural repairs. So he's got to disclose that. And he can't just give one report. He's going to have, a buyer's going to have to know that the seller chose to use this one.
Okay.
Otherwise, buyer's going to close.
I'm not sure I like your qualification of my question being sneaky. But okay.
So if he gets one report that says there are no foundation issues, that's the same thing. You would still disclose that as.
So if the seller gets one report that says everything's fine, I'd stop. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Patricia. I'd stop. It's when he gets more, why he would want another one after he gets one that's good. I don't know.
Say this is the last one that he got.
Okay, so then he's going to give them all of them. Because here's the real world. It's too small a world. Buyer buys it, later has foundation problems. They call up a foundation company.
Yeah, we gave him a quote.
Same one.
Hey, did he give you that report? Said you need $20,000 worth of foundation. Oh, never saw that. Boomers, thank you very much for being on. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob.
You guys have a great day.
Thank you. Great class. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you.
Burger Fixins is closed.
It closed permanently? Really? What happened? I thought they did a lot of business.
And it turns out they have a sister restaurant up in Gunter that they have now asking people to visit, but I don't know if I think so. The owners, about 2 years ago, the prior owner sold to some new owners about 2 years ago.
What did you say, James closed?
Not the same.
Burger Fixings in Salina. It's a restaurant. And
Oh, they sold, the new owners have changed.
the owners changed, and then I think recently I saw that there were no vehicles in front of them, which was during the middle of the day. Then I heard in a meeting they had closed and are now instructing people to visit them in their sister restaurant up in Ghana. But that's on such an important corner that there may be a lot of widening.
Yeah.
And that, because they've been.
Now, that was a little site, little places. That's good.
But I thought of you when I heard that. I said, oh,
Is there another place, really good burgers in Salina?
I don't know about good burgers, but there are several new restaurants up on the square now.
No way.
No way. Are you serious?
Yes.
On the square.
On the square.
I don't know if I've ever really been on the square.
If you've ever been to Burger Fixings, the square is just across the railroad trail.
She thought I was teasing.
There's tenders.
Well, right now,
Barbecue tenders.
around the same time, we another burger, 20, like there's. She's sweet.
But they are not another burger place I can think of that truly focuses on burgers.
That's right.
So I'm
kind of just adding. I think so. Have you added?
Take a will. You know what? This morning.
Thank you, Bob.
I was getting.
Thank you for being here.
Well, it's a pleasure.
Business cards.
It's an honor, actually.
Business cards.
Well, you can still try to like find here, like get involved.
My database.
That's what I do. You know, I don't know.
Have a good rest of your week.
Yes, sir, you too.
Oh, and Merry Christmas and
Thank you
Happy
very
New Year
much.
if I don't see you
too.
before then.
Okay.
So I had to drop my Oh my God, I got to like number 200, I was getting the ADD. I was, and it looked like two different people signed that. I mean, it was like, don't try to write your name for it.
Oh, no. I do well enough to write it 5 times a day.
Well, if I would have known, Sarah, yes, I could have done like, I could have done like,
Yeah.
I could have done 109 for 4
Yes,
hours.
yes.
So I was like, that's not taking very long. I'm just,
Yes.
yeah.
Added like.
Don't try that.
Yes.
I'm just saying, don't try this at home.
I would try to use it.
I told Sarah I had.
That he was saying how. Did you go to the command? Yeah. Well, yesterday. Yeah, wasn't it today? Later generation. Well, wasn't it today though?
We respond to a thing and then we go to the office visit.
Yeah, wasn't it today? Yes. Oh, how was it? Because I wasn't looking at that is just how to use the command and your website. Okay, to do the data translation. And next, this is one the next 2 lines that pull out was this. Okay. Yeah. What are you? Yeah, I'm gonna go to this next class because I think it's like 2 weeks. Use that super key. And super key, yeah, I did. I open house. Oh no, I haven't opened any houses yet. But I have it. House. Yeah, and you have to create a pin. Do you use showing time? Showing time. Yes. See, I haven't done any open houses yet. I'm trying to, stuff. But I think right now I need to show some houses, you want to like join something, you can give some just like join a team. I'm really thinking about it. I'm not sure. Are you thinking about it? I think I start off with their team, just the big database. Yeah, judge rule. Yeah, still is a good start. What are you thinking about? Bob, can we visit for a little bit?
Let's go to my office. Sure.
Like the team or the group that you're thinking about.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Thank you. So, yeah, see, I don't know. I'm just trying to know. I'm trying to like, get more experience. Yeah, my dad too, but like, you know, he's, you know, he retired now since I wanted to, you know, now he's wanting to, you know, so you have good good resources. Yeah, but see, like he's coming to the classes too, so he can get updated on information because he got his real estate license like years ago. Real estate was kind of like on the side for him, like he had like a main job, but now he's getting back into business because you know, getting into it. So. Yeah, I'm good at this. Yeah. Do you know how to use the showing time? Showing time. Let me see. Not yet. I haven't utilized it yet. But my dad has used it before. And he showed, but I haven't used it personally, like the showing houses, because I don't have any listings. Like, do you have a coach? Is Shanna your coach? So no, who is my coach? Okay, so you went to all the Ignite classes, right? Yeah, but I missed it just a Monday. Okay, so just go to that one, the one that you missed, and then afterwards, your next thing is what you need to do is you need to find a coach. So Shanna, Laura, and then Joe Flores. Those are the three coaches, but Janice is over both. So I picked Jana as my coach. So at first I was kind of confused on like how coaching works because I thought that you would receive listings from them, but that's not really how it works. Like basically they're kind of like coaching, making sure you're like on the right track. For instance, she told me that by the end of December I should have like 50 contacts in command, and then by January I should have 100, and then skip to March I should have like 200 or something. So by that point my business should start flowing, you know. How she should one by one to get you a schedule for you. Okay, so like you're scheduled a meeting with her, you know. So I scheduled a meeting with her last week, and we just discussed, you know, like my goals, like what do I aspire to, how many sales do I aspire to make, how much do I want to grow at the end of the year. That's basically the kind of conversation I can have. Or maybe just a meeting.